From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. About a year ago, I received an invitation to be a guest on a podcast. In this case, it wasn't just any podcast. The title was Remarkable People, and the host was a remarkable person in his own right, Guy Kawasaki. I'd followed Guy and his work for many years and was extremely honored to be included as a guest, especially as I was joining the likes of Jane Goodall, Deepak Chopra, Angela Duckworth, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and many others. I had a great time on his show, and I was subsequently very excited when Guy accepted my request for him to be on my show. Guy Kawasaki is probably best known as the chief evangelist at Apple during their formative years as a scrappy underdog taking on the tech behemoths of the time. Today, in addition to hosting the Remarkable People podcast, Guy is chief evangelist for Canva. He's an executive fellow of the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley and adjunct professor of the University of New South Wales. Guy Kawasaki has written 17 books, including The Macintosh Way, Wise Guy, and The Art of the Start 2.0. Guy has a BA from Stanford University, an MBA from UCLA, and an honorary doctorate from Babson College. I hope you enjoy this blue sky conversation with Guy Kawasaki as much as I did. Guy Kawasaki, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Here I am.
Or should I say aloha? You are joining me from Hawaii, and I appreciate it. Quite a thrill for me. This is sort of a home and home if this were a sporting event. I was on your podcast, honored to do so, had a great time. And now the tables have turned, and this might even be sort of a personality question. When it comes to a podcast episode, do you prefer being the host or the guest?
Wow. It is much easier for me to be the guest because it takes no prep. But being the host, I probably prep 5 hours for each episode. How long do you prep for each episode?
I would say it's close to that. And I would give the exact same answer. I love hosting, but it's way more work. And guesting, I think, is a lot of fun. But either way with you, it's always fun. So I would like to talk about your upbringing and maybe how that has informed the rest of your life. You, as I understand, were born and raised in Honolulu. And tell us what your childhood was like. You know, a lot of us would think of it just being this idyllic Hawaii upbringing. Was that what your childhood was like, or describe it for me?
I would say it was kind of idyllic, but not idyllic in the sense of, I was a billionaire's son and I was driving around, Rolls Royces and stuff. I come from a lower middle income part of Hawaii. It's called Kalihi Valley. And if any of your listeners are from Oahu and I say Kalihi Valley, they know what I mean. It's not exactly Atherton, California, if you know what I mean, or Connecticut. So I went to a public elementary school, and a public elementary school teacher convinced my parents to take me out of the public school system of Hawaii, put me in a private school. And luckily, my parents listened to her, made the sacrifices. I got into that private school. That private school led to getting into Stanford. Stanford led me to meet somebody who gave me the job at Apple, and the rest is history. So I did not come from a wealthy family. On the other hand, I didn't know I was poor. So, it's not like I ever didn't have food or clothing or anything. I had several experiences in Hawaii that really shaped me in a good way. And that kind of convinced me to study and work hard for the rest of my life.
Had your parents gone to college? Were they college graduates?
No, I'm first generation.
So you were one way you were fortunate is your parents put a value on your education, both.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's a whole Asian thing.
Yeah, right, right. And then Hawaii to Stanford is physically a pretty long way away, and so that was a big deal getting there.
Yeah. Well, you can't exactly drive to college.
No, not exactly. Or bop home for a 3-day weekend.
Well, you can do that.
I guess easier today, certainly. So was Stanford your first exposure to the tech world? And was that sort of happening when you were at Stanford?
Well, when I went to Stanford, it was 1972. So that's kind of pre-tech, I mean. Yeah, I mean, you didn't even have Hewlett-Packard calculators yet. But I will tell you something that when I got off that plane at SFO and the Stanford sends a van to pick up the incoming freshmen, and then they drop you off at the campus, man, I said, I am in my element. This is the place for me. It was like, you see these people's houses and they're just freaking amazing. You see all these German and Italian cars. You see all these blonde girls. I think, Guy, you have arrived.
So needless to say, you loved Stanford. And one of the first things that is always said about you in your bio is your stints at Apple. You actually had 2 different stints, and you've been given credit for coining the phrase brand evangelist.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was Jesus before me, but yeah. I mean,
well, brand. Yeah, let's go with brand evangelist.
Okay. Well, Christianity is a brand, but anyway.
There you go. So what was it like? You were first at Apple in the 80s, a very different company from what it was today. What was the culture like? What was the environment like? And then we'll talk about Steve Jobs.
Well, okay, so I was at Apple from 83 to 87 and then 95 to 97. And in the first tour of duty at Apple, I was within the Macintosh division. So the Macintosh division was within Apple, and there was the peripherals division and the Apple II division. And Steve Jobs, also the Lisa division. And Steve Jobs ran the Macintosh division. So I dare say it's not an understatement to say that the Macintosh division was different from the rest of the company because Steve Jobs ran it. And, we were drinking the Kool-Aid. We really believed that Macintosh would prevent a totalitarian 1984 Orwellian world. In other words, America in 2025. So, so we truly believe that we're on a mission to prevent this kind of totalitarianism and information control. And we really believed that it wasn't just a computer to us; it was a way of preserving democracy and freedom.
Fascinating. Well, I was starting to use computers around that time, and it'd be very hard for our younger listeners to really understand how breakthrough the Macintosh was. And, seeing a screen that wasn't this weird electronic type, right, that you could draw on and all these things. And you mentioned 1984, before Super Bowl commercials were a big thing. The 1984 ad from Apple was the big one. And I believe it only aired on television once during that Super Bowl. So you were there at the time. Was that video? Was that almost like a pep rally for you?
Well, there's a whole back channel story to that video because Mike Murray was the director of marketing of the Macintosh division. And I think they bought like $5 million worth of time or something. And right before the Super Bowl, Mike Murray made a big mistake by showing it to the board of directors, and the board of directors hated it because, it was so different from, I don't know, Super Bowl commercials for Smucker's strawberry jam or, or the Ford 150 or whatever. So anyway, the board of directors wanted us to pull the ad. And I've never really established this, but I don't know if Mike Murray lied to the board or he was telling the truth, but he said something like, well, we can't pull back. We already bought the time. And, we're not going to get a refund. We're just going to eat the 5 million or whatever it was. So I guess the board let them run it. And then, of course, it was a huge success. And now we look back, that was like the quintessential kind of advertising, right? And I'm sure the people on the board back then now look back and say, yeah, I told Mike Murray, this is a great ad. We should run it. Yeah, we should run it more than once. Yeah.
Success has many parents. Yes.
Well,
yes.
I got to tell you, success has many parents in Silicon Valley. What we do is we throw a lot of shit up against the wall. Some of it sticks. We go up to the wall. We paint the bullseye around it. We say we hit the bullseye. You can always hit the bullseye if you paint the bullseye on the target after you see what's stuck. Yeah, that is a winning formula.
Guy Kawasaki was clearly a good student when he was a kid in Hawaii. And when a teacher recommended that he move to a different school, his parents, who clearly valued education, made the effort to transfer him. From there, he was able to get into Stanford, and once he was off the Hawaiian Islands and on this idyllic campus, he felt like this was where he was meant to be. He eventually wound up at Apple Computer during some amazing times in that iconic company's history. When talking about Steve Jobs and shifting goals, he said that in the tech world, you simply move the bullseye after you see what's stuck. This reminded me of my time with Ted Turner, where we always said his MO was ready, fire, aim. Now, back to our conversation. So what was brand evangelizing like in the 80s? Again, for people we're so used to, cell phones obviously didn't exist. The name of the company was Apple Computer. It wasn't Apple. And there was no social media. So what was it like being a brand evangelist for the 1980s Apple?
So back then, if you were a computer company and you were introducing a new operating system, which didn't exactly happen very often, but if you did that, what you would try to do is you would meet with software developers and you would say, all right, so how much is it going to cost for you to put your software on this platform? So you would try to use money and buy, R&D projects, basically. But, for better or for worse, we believe that we could use fervor and zeal and evangelism to convince people to bet their whole companies on a computer from Cupertino, California, that many people had not heard of, that, everybody's thinking, yeah, those crazy kids at Apple, they're sitting around in their beanbag chairs and they got their Birkenstocks and they're drinking white wine and they're smoking marijuana. Yeah, let's just bet our company on their company. But what I just said has a tone of sarcasm, but let me tell you, it's more true than not.
Well, and the biggest incumbent was IBM, which was this behemoth. And compared to what you just described, mostly men, frankly, back then, in suits and ties and corporate and trusted and solid, and you guys were out there.
Everything we were, basically.
Yes, and maybe your Hawaiian background and your style it fit in beautifully at that company.
Well, to tell you the truth, to go back into my checkered past, after I graduated from Stanford, back then, if you were Asian American, your parents wanted you to be a doctor, lawyer, or dentist, and I tried pre-med for about 1 week and I went on a tour of a Stanford hospital and I fainted. So I figured, Guy, you're not cut out to be a doctor. And then I thought, I must have read some article about, back then, and it said dentists as a profession have the highest rate of suicides. All right, so there goes medical, there goes dental. I guess I should be a lawyer. And then I went to law school for 2 weeks and quit. So, I have a very checkered past in job and career development. And so anyway, what I did is I went to work after I quit law school, the following year, I came back to UCLA to get an MBA. And that's a 4-day-a-week program. So I had the fifth day, Friday was always open. And because I come from a lower middle income family, I had to work to make money. So I took a job working for a jewelry manufacturer. I mean, literally, schlepping gold and diamonds. And after I graduated with my MBA, I went to that jewelry company when all my friends were going to Wells Fargo and B of A and Accenture and Goldman Sachs and McKinsey and all that. But when I went to that jewelry company in sales and marketing, it forced me to become a salesperson. And that is one of the most valuable lessons I ever had in my life, because quite frankly, I have come to believe that there are only two truly essential functions in business. Somebody's got to make it and somebody's got to sell it. So if you can't make it, you better be able to sell it. And so I wasn't an engineer. So guess what? I had to learn how to sell. And selling in the jewelry business is hand-to-hand combat. I mean, I think a lot of people today, they think selling is, well, we're going to do this A/B test on our website. And, if the border of the graphic is purple, we're going to see how many people click. If it's red, how many people click. If it's blue, how many people click. I guess that's an ABC test. So, they think sales is doing about these A/B tests, using Google and big data and all that. But in the jewelry business, sales is hand-to-hand combat. You go to a store, they keep you waiting for 2 hours. They give you 15 minutes to show your line. They look at the ring and they say, well, this ring has, such and such grams of gold. The spot price of gold today is, I don't know, back then it was probably 400, it's 4,000 today. And so, there's probably, I don't know, $75 worth of gold. I'm a generous guy. I'm going to give you a 10% markup. So, I'll give you $82.50. And they're trying to buy your designs for scrap value. It was a very tough business.
No, great training. And you're right, though. I mean, I think people think that you either work in sales or you don't. And the reality is we all are in sales in some way, shape, or form.
We are all in sales. People don't understand that. Like some people think that sales is a bad word and, it's like, I don't know, it's pimping or something. But I mean, you're selling when you get a job interview. You're selling when you want a raise. You're selling when you're talking to the person at Hawaiian Airlines saying, yeah, I know your regulation for a surfboard is 120 inches. My surfboard with the bag is 130 inches. What is 10 inches? Just put the board on the plane. You are selling. You are selling.
I have a feeling that's a personal. I think that I'm guessing that happened to you, and we're going to talk about surfing if we can get there. So back to your time at Apple, because I came to know you. I mean, I've followed your career and I've read not all of your books. I believe you're in double digits on books. But let's talk about, I came to see you recently about Remarkable People, your podcast, and you worked for a remarkable person. And there have been pages and pages and pages written about Steve Jobs. I'd love to hear your take on Steve Jobs in terms of the kind of person he was, and then also, was Steve Jobs an optimist?
I would say that working for Steve Jobs is the most formative experience of my career. There's never been anybody like him. I don't think there ever will be anybody like him. He's a visionary. He has passion. And I don't use those words loosely because every clown says I'm a visionary. Like, 2025, we're going to sell books online. I'm a visionary. Well, have you heard of Amazon, pal? I hate to tell you, but you're not the first to this rodeo. So anyway, and he was extremely demanding. It was actually scary to work for him, because at any given moment he could just rip you in public, and he could fire you on the spot. And he definitely was a benevolent dictator, shall I say. I wouldn't say he's touchy-feely. I wouldn't say that he was, to use a word today, I don't think he was exactly woke. On the other hand, I will tell you that Steve Jobs, he did not give a shit about your race, your gender, your religion, your height, your weight, your country of origin, anything. All he cared about was can you help me make the best computer possible? Nothing else mattered. And, if you think about that, that's a pretty good situation to be in, right? And so, he hired people from the Apple II repair department and, they designed the guts of the Macintosh. And it was truly a great experience. I would say that the correct terminology to describe him is that he was a mission driven. Now, I worked in Silicon Valley for about 40 years, so I'm an expert in assholes. And I don't mean in the proctology sense, I mean the assholes of people. And, the most common form of asshole is an asshole who believes that it's about self glorification, that this company is all about me. I have my PR assistant. I have my personal assistant. My personal assistant has a personal assistant. I have a driver. I have security. If you ever have to deal with any meta executives and they come to speak for you at a conference, you're going to see 20 people roll in because there's a personal assistant, a personal assistant's personal assistant, a driver's assistant, a driver's, whatever. That was how it worked. And Apple was not about Steve Jobs. Macintosh was not about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs wanted to create the world's greatest computer. That was his mission. And if you could contribute to that, you were on the team. And if you were destructive to that, you were off and out.
Guy's parents wanted him to go into a profession like law or medicine. But once Guy ruled those out, he figured out he was really good at sales. And these skills have served him well for the rest of his life. His exposure to Steve Jobs, about whom he says there was never anyone like him before or since, led him to a lifelong interest in remarkable people. Jobs was not easy. Guy describes him as a benevolent dictator. But he never let personal biases get in the way of hiring people who could do the work. The only question he had about Apple employees, Guy says, was, can you help me make a better computer? If the answer to that was yes, it didn't matter what you looked like, where you were from, or where you went to school. You could be on the team. Now back to our conversation and more about Steve Jobs. As I think about it now, as you describe this, in the 80s, I wouldn't say he was even really a household name or front and center of that company the way like an Elon Musk is at Tesla. It was Wozniak was there, and Steve Jobs became well known as a person probably more when he was fired and when he came back than in that time. So you were there but let's go back though. It sounds to me, and I think I can anticipate your answer. Would you describe him as an optimist?
Well, let me put it to you this way. Steve was such an optimist. He was borderline delusional. I mean, There's people who are optimists, and there are people who believe they can, bend the spoon with their mind and change the outcome of the universe. That was Steve Jobs.
Interesting. Yeah, and I share this with you when I was on your show. I had very similar experiences with a fairly similar guy, Ted Turner, and I think it's why, and this is a bridge to my next question, I think it's why we're both interested in remarkable people, because we had these formative experiences with a remarkable person. And so let's talk about that. You have a podcast, and I've come to know doing a podcast is not easy. It's hard work, and like you said, 5 hours prep for an interview. You could have done a podcast. You have a lot of interests. You could have done a podcast about surfing. You could have done a podcast about living in Hawaii. You've decided to profile remarkable people. Why?
You mean as opposed to surfing or living in Hawaii? I mean, what?
Why are you so fascinated with people?
Well, what am I going to talk about 52 weeks a year about surfing or living in Hawaii?
I'll find you a podcast that does that, I'm sure.
Well, first of all, you have to understand the nature of my podcast is that it is not about me. It is about my guest, right? Right. So it's different. I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not talking about my stuff. And so I figured out, okay, so if you really want to know the origin of my podcast, I had finished a book called, let me think, which book was it? I'd finished a book called Wise Guy. And Wise Guy is a collection of the stories of my life that contributed to my accumulated wisdom, should you grant me that I have wisdom. So anyway, so I was on a book tour for Wise Guy, and I kept running into these podcasters. So finally I asked one, I said, so, tell me about podcasting. Like, how does it work? He says, well, I sell one ad at the beginning of the podcast, one ad in the middle of the podcast, one ad at the end of the podcast. I said, well, it's okay. So I understand that. So how much do you charge for these ads? He said, well, the first one is the best one because that's when most people are listening. So that one's 25 grand. How about the one in the middle? 15 grand. How about the one at the end? 10 grand. So I'm like, 25, 15, 10. That's 50 grand. And you do 52 podcasts a year. 50 times 50 is 2.5 million. I said, so you're telling me that you're doing about 2.5 million? And he says, well, actually, I do more than 52 podcasts. So yeah, I do more than 2.5 million. So I said to myself, why the hell am I writing a book? You can write a book every 2 years. It takes a year to write, and then as soon as it comes out, there's mistakes in it, and you regret saying something because you held up Elon Musk as a great hero of innovation, and now he's like firing everybody in the government and all that's like, oh my God, I got to take that chapter about Elon Musk out, or something like that. And so I said, I got to do this podcasting thing. So I figured out, okay, so that is a great model. Of course, I have not achieved any of that. I don't sell any ads for 25, 15, or 10, but that's besides the point. And
yeah, I'm glad you said that because I was about to put a disclaimer on this whole show and not let anyone think that my economics approach that either. So keep going.
Okay, so that was the sort of catalyst of why I would look at podcasts. And then in a rare, deep moment for me, I said, Guy, you are fortunate because you have access to some of the most remarkable people in the world, not because they're my best friends, but because of my work at Macintosh. Remarkable people tend to use Macintosh. And so they knew who I was. We didn't know each other personally, but they knew of me as opposed to knew me. And so I figured out, Guy, you have the ability to get to these people. And because of 40 years of working in business, I really knew what to ask. I mean, if there's a criticism I have of many podcasters is that all they have done is podcasting, right? So they've never actually run a company. They've never actually introduced the product. They've never actually fired somebody. They've never actually had their ass handed to them by a competitor. So if you just like pontificating on your podcast all the time and all that, it leads to a kind of question that is not founded in reality. I didn't have that problem. So I figured out, Guy, you have the access to the people, you have the ability to ask these kind of difficult questions. And because you're so old, you don't give a shit anymore. You have the guts to ask these questions. So I thought, maybe I have a moral obligation to do a podcast. So then, my very first episode was Jane Goodall, right? So how can you start any better than Jane Goodall, right? And so Jane Goodall was my first guest, and you as a podcaster, you've been both a host and a guest, so you know that people have a very simple kind of decision-making tree when they decide to go on a podcast or not. I know it's my tree too, which is like when somebody asks you to come on their podcast, the first question you ask is, who else has been on your podcast? And if they say, John Smith, Jane Smith, Joe Blow, and, Jane Shett, the rag woman, you say, I gotta go. I'm kind of busy. It's not strategic for me. On the other hand, if somebody asks you, well, who else has been on your podcast? And you say, well, I've had Jane Goodall, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Steve Wozniak, Margaret Atwood. I've had 2 Nobel Prize winners. I've had 3 MacArthur Award winners. I've had the Surgeon General of the United States. I've had the person who did the Human Genome Project. I've had Tony Fauci. Most people do not turn you down.
Well, you did, to the point where when you reached out to me, I thought it was a mistake. You go truly. I mean, you go to your podcast site, and you see a picture of Jane Goodall, and I'm like, it's like one of these things doesn't belong here. So it was a great honor, and it shows in your interviews that you do your homework, and and then you also, this would have come later, I'm sure, you have a Substack. Substack probably didn't exist when you started the podcast. And you recently wrote one about optimism. And I want to build a bridge here, because as I looked at the tributes to Jane Goodall, and what a remarkable human being. I mean, talk about starting your podcast with a bang, and someone who has left this world with such an impact. It did strike me, and I have a biased lens. She worked on really tough stuff, and she was truly an optimist. I mean, you could see it in her face. You could see it in her grit, her resilience. Can you describe her, your relationship with her, and the optimism that came through in her and her work?
Yeah. So this is a very good story. And is there a time limit for your podcast? Because my stories
Take
are
your time. There's no time limit for a story about Jane Goodall, so proceed.
All right. So I have to repeat a story and take you back into history, right? So I'm in the lower middle class part of Honolulu. The 6th grade teacher tells my parents to put me in a private school. I get into private school. Private school leads me to get into Stanford. Stanford leads me to meet Mike Boych. Mike Boych is the guy who nepotistically gave me my job at Apple. At Apple, I became a software evangelist. I started evangelizing Macintosh. I developed let's just say, a awareness of who I am because of my work on Macintosh. Fast forward about 10 or 15 years, I get an email out of the blue, and this woman says, I run TEDx Palo Alto, and Jane Goodall has just accepted to be on our stage. I need somebody to interview her on the stage. We don't know each other, but I use a Macintosh, so I know who you are. And I said, you telling me, you asking me to come on stage to interview Jane Goodall? And she said, yeah. I said, no problem. I will be there. At that interview actually cost me about $50,000 because I had a paid speech someplace. I said, at the end of my life, am I going to say, God, Guy, if you only had made 50 grand more, you'd be happy? Or are you going to say, I got to interview Jane Goodall? Yeah, who else can say that, right? So I interview Jane Goodall. We become friends because, quite frankly, I'm in awe of her. And I've interviewed her for other things. I've done other things for her. Basically, she has recorded video for me. She was on a podcast for me. We was constantly going back and forth doing things for each other. And, I truly think that she was the most remarkable person. And I don't say that lightly. I interview a lot of remarkable people. And the last time I saw her, this is a great Jane Goodall story. The last time I saw her was at her 90th birthday party. And it was in San Francisco in the Salesforce Tower. And, the nature of Jane Goodall's life was that she traveled 300 days a year. Now, some people travel 300 days a year, but, they're going from Kona to Miami to, I don't know, Bali and all that. But Jane Goodall was traveling, and the nature of her travel every day is she's meeting with schools and kids and nonprofits and government agencies. She's not just making one speech in the Ritz-Carlton and then going to the massage, and then going to the pool and catching her private plane home. So anyway, I went up to Jane. I said, Jane, you ought to chillax for a while. Take it easy. Have a few days off. we have a guest house. Come stay with me, Jane. And, we won't ask you for autographs. We won't ask you for pictures. You won't be on display. Just come and relax at my house, Jane. And she said, Guy, I cannot do that. There's too much to do.
Amazing.
And I said, holy shit, that's why Jane Goodall is Jane Goodall and you're not, Guy.
Right. And I believe she had been in New York within a week or so of when she passed, I think. I mean, she was still on tour, basically, and telling her story with this incredible resilience and smile on her face, and just incredible. Wow. We were all impacted by her death, and I never came close to meeting her. I can only imagine what it was like for you, and what an inspiration.
Yeah, she's the kind of person, whenever you think, I have done so much, you start clapping yourself on the back. You say, well, Guy, you really suck compared to Jane Goodall.
Yes, keeps us humble in a good way.
Yes, and if I had one word to describe Jane Goodall, the word would be hope. She gave us hope.
Yeah, exactly. I love Guy's line about Steve Jobs when he says he was so optimistic he was borderline delusional. To this, I would add, as long as you stay on this side of delusional, I'd say that's the right place to be, especially as an entrepreneur. Another great optimist was Jane Goodall, and how lucky was Guy to have had such a relationship with her. She believed so much in her cause that she worked right up to the time of her death. Rather than take Guy up on his offer for a break in Hawaii, she said she couldn't afford that, as there was just too much to do. Now back to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Guy Kawasaki. So speaking of hope and its close cousin, optimism, you wrote an entire Substack about optimism. You very graciously dubbed me the king of optimism, which it's a heavy crown that I wear since I got that label, and it's a huge responsibility. Thank you very much. In that piece, you described optimism as not just a good, happy feeling, but a strategic advantage. How is optimism a strategic advantage?
Well, I think to accomplish anything of significance, you have to be optimistic, right? I mean, because if you don't believe that you can make the world a better place, or better product, better service, well, I don't know how you would do it, because unless you think the world is just going to lay down at your feet and everything's going to be easy, you're going to have to struggle. So I guess if you take one layer off an optimist, you will at the very least find a realist, right? Because a realist has to know, man, it is going to be hard to introduce a new computer. It's going to be hard to get retailers to carry it. It's going to get hard to get developers to write software for it. It's going to be hard to go up against IBM. So that's all the realism, borderline pessimism. But if you're an optimist, you say, yeah, that's all true, but we're still going to do it. I mean, that's what it takes.
I love that, because I do think it's one of the pushbacks I get. I know people out there think that optimists just sit around assuming everything's la-di-da and it's going to be easy and everything's just naturally going to get better. No, you have to be realistic. You have to get after it. And that's something I saw in Ted Turner. Our IBM was ABC, NBC, and CBS back then. And Ted said, yeah, well, we're going to be, they said when he's starting CNN, they said there's news on at 6, 7, 11. So what's the point? And Ted says, well, I get home at 8. And there are other people like me, so we need 24-hour news. You also, late in life, have taken on new challenges. The vision people have of Hawaiians that everybody surfs from the day they were born. You took up surfing, and you surf every day, roughly, I believe. But you didn't take it up till your 60s. You took up ice hockey in your 40s. I was lucky enough. I started skating and playing hockey when I was about 6. I can only imagine what that was like. Tell me about taking on these challenges late in life, because I think a key to being hopeful and optimistic is staying active and trying new things. So tell us about that.
I took up hockey at 44 to play with my kids. I took up surfing at 60 to surf with my daughter. And I I think it's because deep in my DNA, somehow, I have a really good growth mindset. And so, speaking of growth mindset, another woman who is remarkable, who has changed so many people's lives, is Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck is the mother of the mindset, the growth mindset concept. And so basically, the growth mindset means that you believe you can learn new things, you can do new things, you can persevere. Because, when you first take up surfing or hockey, it's not going to be pretty. But if you have the growth mindset, you will still try. And then you throw in the perseverance and grit mindset of Angela Duckworth. So that's what it takes. And if you have a fixed mindset, you believe you cannot start surfing at 60. You cannot start ice hockey at 44, having come from Hawaii, where there's no such thing as pond hockey. And the closest thing to, ice hockey is shave ice. So maybe I'm just nutso that way, but it just never occurred to me that, you're too old to try this. And if I had taken up surfing when I was a kid, I would not have accomplished as much as I have accomplished in my life, because surfing is the most fun you can have legally that I have found.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I'm so glad you brought up the growth mindset, because I think it is related to optimism and curiosity. And when I had Kelly Corrigan on my show, great writer, podcaster, TV host, and she was my 50th episode. And by that point, I was starting to see patterns, as you do when you start doing this work. And I realized basically everyone I'd had on the show, somewhere in the conversation, it became clear that they were lifelong learners. They were curious. They tried new things. And I said to Kelly, why do you think that is? Because I was actually struggling trying to relate that to optimism. And she right away said, it's a fundamentally optimistic position to take. If you think there's always more to learn, there's always new people to meet, there's always new sports to try, hobbies, you're going to be optimistic. Does that ring true to you?
It absolutely rings true to me. And although I got to tell you, man, I'm 71. I don't think I'll be thinking of anything more right.
Well, you've done enough. I am so honored to have been on your show, to be lumped in as a remarkable person with people like Jane Goodall and Carol Dweck and the others you've had on the show. I'm probably even more honored that you took your time to be with me. So I can't thank you enough for being on the Blue Sky podcast, for all you've done for me. And I really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, it's not that big a deal because, I'm in Hawaii. I mean, what else could I be doing but being on your podcast? Well, I could be surfing.
Yeah, so you're probably, I'm guessing the wax is right over in the corner of your room and you're getting ready to go. So thank you so much, Guy Kawasaki.
I will be surfing later today. Yes. In your honor. It's not because I want to.
I appreciate that. Your nose is growing right through the screen as you say that. So thank you for the remarkable person you are and the optimist that you are, and for taking this time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the optimism you bring to people, because if we're going to make this world a better place, it's going to take some optimism. Yeah.
You got it. Thank you, sir.
All righty.
Take care. Aloha.
Off I go. Yes. Aloha is the word. Bye-bye.
It won't surprise you, dear listener, that I agree with Guy that optimism is a strategic advantage. And I love the idea of trying new things late in life. Ice hockey and surfing are not at all easy sports to pick up, and it's clear that Guy takes great satisfaction in having done so. Now cruising into his 8th decade, Guy Kawasaki's ability to maintain a growth mindset and a high level of non-delusional optimism has served him well. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Guy Kawasaki. Before you go, it would help us out a lot if you'd leave us a rating and or review. And consider subscribing to the Blue Sky podcast and following the Optimism Institute on social media to be sure you never miss a future episode. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. And this and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the remarkable team at Sound On Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.